back to From Pain to Gain. I'm Ivan, and here's my bestie of all time. Well, I should say bestie, one of my besties. I don't want to get somebody offended. It
Your
might
wife
be
might
upset.
be upset about that one.
Yeah. One of my BFFs, Jason Montoya over here. Say hello, brother.
Hello, I'm Jason Scott Montoya. It's good to be here to talk about the Sermon on the Mount and how the Beatitudes apply to the presidential candidates. Once again, this is what, episode 4?
Yep, episode 4. We got a few more to go after this. So let's jump right in. Today we are covering Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Jason will be the one actually defining it this time at the beginning. So Jason, it's off to you.
Yeah. So this is Matthew 5:6. So I'm going to read just two translations. The first is the Christian Standard Bible, which is, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." And then the Message version says, "You are blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink and the best meal you've ever had." So those are a couple things. I have an interesting commentary here from the Bible Project about this particular beatitude. So I'm going to go ahead and read that, introduce that in the conversation. When we trust that right relating with God and others is no less essential for life than food or water, Jesus teaches us our lives will be turned upside down. We start living like we're already in God's kingdom and start experiencing a taste of its goodness. Throughout his time on earth, Jesus was lifting the downtrodden and challenging those who sought power at the cost of the helpless. As an ultimate expression of this righteous way, Jesus willingly gives up his life. His death is at once a demonstration of humanity's cruel hunger for power and God's boundless mercy, justice, and determined pursuit of right relationships. Jesus calls us to push aside our craving for personal gain and become like him. He promises that our hunger for his way of life will not leave us wanting. How good is life for those who hunger and thirst for right relationships, because they will be satisfied. Did you catch it? He's saying that if we become hungry for right relating with others, we will eventually be satisfied. All of restored humanity will live in a flourishing world where no human being does harm or relates poorly to another. That's the home everyone was built for. If we hunger for that, we will be satisfied. Through his way of life and teaching, Jesus is slowly but surely changing our hearts, teaching us to love one another like he does, and loving us into an uncorruptible home where right relating, righteousness, will be our daily fare. And so a couple of interesting things that pop out there is, that right relating, they kind of correlate righteousness to right relating. It's right relating to our relationship with God, and through right relating in our relationship with God is to right relate to our neighbors and our friends and our community, our rivals and our enemies. And so, in the sense of Jesus comes down to earth to save us, and humanity cruelly punishes him and murders him, and yet he still pursues that relationship with us. And so this beatitude of pursuing righteousness, it's pursuing right relating, it's a hunger for it. So it's something we work towards, we move towards. And God is essentially promising, like, when we pursue that, we'll be satisfied. Our hunger will be satisfied. So I think about in the Old Testament when it says, you know, our we do not live by bread alone, and Jesus quotes this and reiterates it. We live by um from a spiritual standpoint. We live on the bread of Christ, on the bread of what God provides us, God as the source of life. And so that kind of connects to this hunger and thirst, I think, with this passage. So what else would you add to that in terms of kind of just thinking about it as a definition before we dive into how it might apply to our candidates?
Well, I want to make a small detour to a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yeah.
Especially because a baby Christian may not understand everything we're putting down right now. A baby Christian may be like, I have to be perfect. I have to please God, or he will smite me with a thunderbolt.
Yeah.
That's just not how he works. Uh, the key principle in this book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by, what is his name? Oh, I'm gonna have to dig up his name now. Peter Scazzero. Um, the key principle is contemplative spirituality and emotional health. So those two have to be combined. Well, a simple example is you can't just want to lock down your wife and your house because y'all have to be together all the time, or you have to be around her all the time because you're taking the Bible literally saying you have to be one. That's just unhealthy. You are individual people. That's a emotional uh, withdrawal type issue that's not being addressed. And then on the other side of that, contemplating it, taking some thought, like what is the deeper context around these biblical verses? Um, so to That's kind of speaking to the journey part of this. If you hunger for a relationship to God, to relate to other Christians, your family, your spouse, it requires those key principles. Um, it helps us to move along the way. There was another pastor I mentioned this quote: "We are not doing the right thing to become righteous. We are doing the right thing because we are righteous in Christ."
Yeah.
Uh, so,
And I,
so
I would just,
yeah,
reiterate that in terms of in the first episode where we talked about these Beatitudes are evidence of God working it out in us. So if we're in relationship with God through Christ, through what he did on the cross, and we are pursuing him, we're letting him pursue us. This Beatitude and the other Beatitudes are evidence of our Christian faith, of our way of life, of our being transformed. And so if someone becomes a Christian, we should see them becoming more and more hungry for righteousness, and we should see that manifest in their life. So these are kind of like symptoms of God in us, if that makes sense. So if
mhm.
we're not hungry or thirsty for righteousness and we're a Christian, then we should ask God, hey, God, please give me that hunger and thirst that I may not have, or that I don't have as much as I would want. Or what am I holding on to that is maybe preventing you from cultivating that thirst and hunger for righteousness in my relationship with you, in relationship with my community, my rivals, my enemies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to speak to how it definitely does seem impossible, look at the example of Martin Luther King Jr., right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He showed a lot of beatitudes because he was driven by God. One could argue he could have stopped at many points, all the death threats even before, the unfortunate incident,
Yeah.
all the family being threatened,
Mm-hmm.
everything around him was saying, stop doing this. And he
Yeah.
could have been
Yeah. And
justified
and
in,
and
yeah,
many of the people used scriptures and Christian reasons for why Martin Luther King Jr. was wrong. But ultimately, one of the interesting things about his sort of his strategy for peaceful political participation was a belief that truth and goodness and justice would prevail in the end. And so there's a hope, a deeply grounded hope. And without that hope, then it's hard to do what you're describing.
yeah. And being driven by God, right? We can't achieve it, to your point
Yeah.
earlier, too, at the beginning of this entire series.
Yeah.
Um, and it brings up another point. Even pastors are not perfect.
Yeah.
Clearly they were in the wrong for thinking Martin Luther King was in the wrong. He had
Hmm.
every justification from every verse. They just found a way to skew the Bible to their
Yeah.
points.
Hmm. Some
Uh,
were actively against him, which was unfortunate. And there were a lot that were just silent. They didn't want to wade into that conflict when they should have. I had a friend recently text me, and he said, I wonder about just myself when I go back, when I think about the civil rights era, or even when there was slavery in the South, and whether I would have spoken up if I was in that era. Would I have done the right thing? Would I have told the truth? Would I have leaned into it? In the civil rights era, if I had a business, would I have let the Black population participate in my business, or would I have turned them away? And so I think that's a really good question for all of us to ask, because now we're in a context where it's different things. It's not those things, but it's different things. And we might look back in history, in the civil rights era, or um, in the era of slavery in American history, and think, oh, well, we wouldn't have done that. But the reality is we probably would have.
yeah.
Unless we have been transformed to a degree that we're willing to step into the fray and speak the truth to power when it is a risk, when
Hmm.
there are potential consequences.
Yes. Another definition from that pastor, and I'll link to him in the comments or not the description. The structure of the Beatitude suggests that righteousness is defined as mercy, purity, and peacemaking. But this pastor also mentioned that it's a connection point to justice.
Hmm. Yeah.
So most of us think of righteousness like don't violate the one commandment or another commandment, but it could apply just to the court system,
Hmm.
a much wider range. Okay. So I think that was a good place to get a baseline. Did you have
Yeah.
anything to add before we jump in, brother?
Um, so yeah, I think justice is an interesting thing. It's a virtue that we can cultivate individually and in participation in our community. It involves practices, it involves ways the laws are done, it's the way that we handle things in our family. But it's oriented towards this concept, this goal. And I think to kind of encapsulate all of it is the God is a community. The Trinity of God is three persons in one, and it's a community and out of the love in that community, humanity was created, and we're invited and enabled to participate in that. Our sin breaks, sort of alienates us from the community, but Christ's work on the cross brings us back in. And so our work is to come back into the fold, but also invite and bring others back into the fold. And so that righteousness, that right living with God and with others, it's for this idea of cultivating this community, which is the kingdom of God, that we can step into today and live in peace and grace and mercy and justice, and be a light in this temporal time that we live until we die, to be a light, to a world that much of the world can be very dark. And so
Hmm.
those are a few thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah, and to add to that, the justice part, it kind of requires a sensitivity and humility.
Hmm.
Uh, I'll give you a very basic example from my early 20s was that when I think a lot of us are a little bit obnoxious in our youth.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was talking to a coworker, and for some reason she showed me a picture on her phone, and I think it was some sort of event that she was sharing about. And I said, "Oh, that guy next to you, is that your cousin or something?" And she was black, he was black. I was thinking maybe that they're family or something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about, oh wait, I mean, she told me it kind of was insensitive because I'm kind of assuming that every black person is her family member, which
Yeah.
is obnoxious. But it takes a little bit of sensitivity to even get there and
Yeah.
to even hear her that how much that I mean, it didn't seriously damage her, but it was, not didn't make her feel good.
Yeah.
So it involves being able to step up and say, I could be a bigger person. I could go for the higher level of righteousness, of
Yeah.
humility that God is calling me to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's good.
All right. Well, last episode, I believe we started with Kamala, so let's go ahead and start with Trump this time in terms of righteousness and all the definitions alongside that mercy, purity, peacemaking. I think we're gonna know where this goes. Um,
Yeah, I
sadly,
mean, out of the Beatitudes we've gone through so far, this one I think Trump has the most trouble with, in terms of not just not embodying it, but actually embodying the opposite. So when I think about Trump, I just think about his deep um, contempt for truth, and his what I call his faith in tragedy, as contrasted to a love of truth and a faith in redemption. And so a faith, it was kind of like we were talking about with Martin Luther King Jr. Like he had this faith in redemption that no matter how bad things were, no matter how unjust they were, they would get better. Things would be rectified. And so the opposite of that is going, actually, they won't. They are bad and they're going to keep getting worse and they're not going to get better. And faith in tragedy says, I'm actually going to exploit the tragedy. I'm going to abuse and use people and take advantage of them in the tragedy, because there's nothing on the other side of tragedy. So I might as well exploit it for my personal gain. And that's essentially the larger story that I've seen when I look across Trump's history. Before he even ran for president in 2016, there was the Trump University where he exploited, I think it was over 6,000 people, several thousand people. And that exploitation has just continued and continued. And it's one, and there have been legal cases one after the next. It could be charities he's raised money for. It could be companies he's run. It's in the political realm. And so Jesus calls us to push aside our craving for personal gain and become like him. And that's the opposite of what Trump done. Trump has embraced selfishness. And even many people that say they, that are Republicans, they'll say he's selfish and he pursues his own personal gain, and yet they still continue to support or vote for him. And Jesus is saying that is unchristian. That is the opposite of the way of life. So that's kind of at the high level. Those are some things that come to mind. I think the other thing is that selfishness and exploitation and the idea of the vulnerable. Those that don't have power. So in the case in this recently, this whole situation in, I think it was Springfield, Ohio, where Trump and his running mate, JD Vance, told these lies about the Haitian citizens in that area, making up stuff about them and perpetuating lies and not correcting their lies. And it's led to that whole community just being entirely disruptive, with tons of bomb threats, schools having to be closed down. Their way of life has just been just harmed. They've been really harmed in a lot of ways through this deception. And that's the opposite of the thirst and hunger for righteousness. The thirst and hunger for righteousness would want to get to know those Haitians. It would be, how do we help them? How do we love them? And that's what people in that community have done, and that's why they're so angry about it. And so it's just a disappointing example of how Trump has embodied the opposite of a thirst and hunger for righteousness, and also just evidence that he's not actually pursuing good things, but rather exploiting these situations for personal gain. It doesn't matter if it's true. If it helps him, he's going to share it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
My predicament with Christian siblings that continue to, I don't know, the best word I could think of is bend the knee
Yeah.
to Trump being their leader, is how there's no possible way he's anywhere close to righteous. And to think that, to follow the lie that all of these cases against him, even the impeachments, are all politically motivated with no evidence to support that. Rather, there's lots of evidence, mountains to support that he is rightfully tried. To say that, or to even think that even not even one of those cases or two or three are valid, and you're just gonna keep on moving with the motion, to not look at it objectively, I think is a anti-hunger
Yeah.
to righteousness. And to
Yeah. Because
speak to,
I think a righteous, on that vein, a righteousness would go, I don't, hey, maybe I don't think that I did some of the things you say, but I want to cooperate with you because I want to get to the truth. I want to make sure that the country knows what happened. Like, there's a different posture that one would have that says, I'm going to help us get to the truth and the good outcome here, versus someone that's, if I was a criminal and I did a bunch of criminal things, I would want to convince a bunch of people that I'm not a criminal and that they're coming after me for false reasons. because then it gives me power and then it protects me from being accountable.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I have to be able, as someone that's looking at the situation, I have to be able to discern, is this an actual criminal who's manipulating everyone? Or is this an innocent person who's just being persecuted? And you can look at the evidence, and most of the people that cry foul about these trials and stuff, they really don't understand them. They haven't read the court cases. They don't know what the evidence is. And they're parroting what they've been told or what they want to hear. They haven't gone into the details. And if they have, and they have legitimate concerns, those people are believable. We can listen to them. Hey, they read all the court transcripts. They have some concerns. These are what they are. That's very different than someone that hasn't done the research and they're just parroting the things they want to say or they want to hear. That makes sense.
Yeah. And it connects to all the leaders that ended up doing atrocities, right?
Mm-hmm.
They,
And either
the
enabling them
people,
or participating in them. Yeah.
yeah, the people who accepted the person's lies. Even just the Roman Empire is a keen example of that. Just a
Yeah.
perpetual state of liars, manipulators. Um, what
Yeah. I
is
mean,
it? People
I mean,
entitled to something.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think, just think of Pilate. Like Pilate knew Jesus was innocent. Um, but to accommodate the religious leaders who were pressuring him and the mob that was pressuring him, he said, you know what? It doesn't really matter. I'm going to let you crucify him. Just get out of my hair. And he washes his hands of responsibility. So he's not accountable. And the mob and the religious leaders get to witness Jesus on a cross, suffering and dying. So,
Yeah. Um, I wonder, to try to get into the brain of a Christian Trump supporter, do you have maybe think that they may not even care that the country survives because the world is ultimately going to end anyways? Like, so
um, so that could be a segment, of the Christians. I don't know. I think a lot of it is, well, there are multiple layers. Um, so the layer you're kind of hitting at would be kind of fundamentally is a failure to understand the real world consequences for their decisions. So, when you take an action, what's the effect, right? And so um, they for a lot of them, one of the reasons they villainize Democrats so much is because it makes, well, that's a bigger problem than our problem. So we're focusing on that problem. So they make it bigger and exaggerate it, and so that which what I've noticed is the worse and more corrupt Trump becomes, and the more evidence and clarity around his corruption rises, the more the rhetoric against Democrats increases. And I think that's part of what's going on. It's a way to because their ideology is based on the villain, in this case Democrats, and so they have to be just these horrible, terrible um, people that are essentially evil and chopping up babies and mutilating kids and eating dogs and cats, and there's got to be all these scapegoats.
yeah,
So that's part of it. Um, and I think part of it is like an arrogance and a pride that they can control the monster. They can, I don't agree with Trump, but the system will hold, or people around him will do the right thing. And it's like, well, the more
yes,
corrupt he becomes, the less of those people around him that would be likely to do that.
yeah, he's already
Um,
got the Supreme Court on his in his
yeah.
pockets.
But if you're afraid of something, I just think about myself. If I'm afraid of something and there's a monster or a villain that I'm afraid of, and someone comes along and says, I'll protect you from that, it my anxiety, it relieves me, it reassures my anxiety, it makes me feel safe. And I get that feeling. And so by pushing back against that person that's giving me that feeling, I'm going to have to feel unsafe and feel anxious. And so I don't want to feel that, because to feel that is to understand that something's wrong and then I might have to also change.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it has to do with a fear of change. A lot of things are changing really fast, and I think that's an
Yeah.
understandable fear. Is like things are rapidly changing, and a lot of people, um, to take one for example, some people have they kind of saw the America as a certain way and their experience of it, and that's changing, and things aren't what they used to be, and that's scary, and so I think that's a layer of it. There's just a lot of layers, but those are some of them. I think the end of the world one, to kind of circle it back around, is certainly a layer of it that um that in a Christian context, sort of the end of the world, apocalypse, revelation, the Antichrist, we kind of have this fantasy story that I think we've kind of twisted and turned a lot of ways, but we just then we look through the world through that lens, and if our enemy is this group and then they seem like they're doing terrible things, then they must be sort of ushering in the end times. I mean, I go to a church where Andy Stanley is the pastor, and I had someone tell me at one point they were talking to one of their friends, and they were saying that, and during 2020, during the pandemic, Andy Stanley was ushering in the end times. And so he was, because of COVID and our church on Sundays, we did services digitally instead of in person. And so people were afraid and saying that our pastor was ushering in the end times, and that the end of the world was coming. And part of that was based on they saw Andy as a villain in their own story, and he's
Mm.
doing something they thought was wrong. And so now he's ushering in the end times. But from my own experience, the end times is it's actually what it is I think what it usually is it's an illusion that's coming to an end. It's the end of my time. Like something in my life is ending or has ended that I haven't grieved. And that part of that journey is coming to an end. And I think, just when I think about my own self and when I've kind of gotten caught up in that kind of thinking, there was a season in my life that was ending and a new chapter was beginning. And I sort of projected that into this large epic story that the end of the world, but it was really just my world, my little world. But there was no distinction for me at the time because my world was the world. Like there wasn't this bigger world. It was just my perception of the world. So I think that's a couple thoughts I have on the end of the world thing.
Yeah. Pastor Alan Parr on YouTube, his channel is The Beat, makes a reference to how even the mark of the beast is going to be fully known. You're going to make a decision about it. You're going to provide consent if you want it. It isn't like this COVID situation where it might sneak into your system somehow. So
Yeah,
yeah,
well, but
there's a lot
even
of
that, like you just take that idea, like we are interpreting revelation in a way that's a literal thing. That could be a symbolic explanation for what's happening spiritually that isn't a literal thing.
oh yeah.
Right. So we're putting a lot into that. And that's kind of what I'm getting at is we're trying to I think a lot of it has to do with uncertainty and not knowing. And so we take something like that and then we say, well, this is what it means.
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, we have no clue what it means.
Yeah.
um, and maybe it's not even all that important compared to what is the primary thing. So that's kind of an example of what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't
Because
make it
then I
easier.
think like what happens is I can start thinking, oh, that must be the mark of the beast. Oh, that must be the mark of the beast. Oh, that
Yeah.
must be like I get paranoid. And that's
Yeah.
not healthy, you know.
Exactly. And then it doesn't help that probably over 90% of Christians don't actually read the Bible to discern for themselves what it actually is,
Yeah, yeah.
and how it is a lot of metaphors and poetry and references back to the Old Testament and the like.
Yeah, correct.
Um,
Yeah. And I grew up in the Left Behind, books and all that. And I think that just kind of shaped how we saw the end of the world and apocalypse and the end times more than the Bible itself. Like that became the replacement for what was coming.
yeah,
And it was just
it's
a
crazy.
fictional story, that got us all scared and riled up. So
Yeah. It's just heartbreaking um, for me to hear, because especially because my empathy is so strong that somebody would essentially vote their conscience in a filtered way. And if the world or the country so happens to fall apart from that, that's just a part of Revelation. That's just such a I don't
Hmm.
care type of
Yeah.
mentality. And it's so not
Yeah, that's a good
not
point because
good.
we can hide behind that story to
Yeah.
and not do anything. And I think that abdication of responsibilities is a horrible outcome or consequence. And that's where I think this beatitude and others are so important is like, okay, Jesus is saying to be in right relationship with other people, to love them, to love one another like he does, and leading us in that. And that's kind of like with Trump, it's like, okay, if you are not loyal to him, he will punish you, he will attack you, he will call you names, he will lie about you, he will treat you horribly. If you're loyal, then he'll defend the worst of people. Um, as long as you're loyal to him, he's there for you. And but so it's really about Trump and whether you're loyal to him or not. And for me, I'm loyal to the truth and goodness. And so when someone, it could be Trump or anyone, even a friend or family, when they diverge from truth and goodness, then my loyalty is not to that person, but it's to the what's true and good. And so and the same would be the other flip side. If I steer away from truth and goodness, then someone ought to speak to me and tell me that. And we ought to hash that out. And that's why accountability is so important.
Yeah.
But Trump divides, he attacks and divides, and he creates. There's this book called the Bait of Satan, and the concept of the story is like Satan throws in this meat between these two dogs, and then one of the dogs will go for the meat, and he'll hurt the other dog, and so the other dog then attacks the other dog back, and then they're fighting each other and ripping each other to shreds, and Satan's long gone. And so that kind of idea of divisiveness is like, am I embodying that spirit of divisiveness where I'm throwing meat between people
Mm,
to cause them to hurt each other so that then they destroy each other? And that is kind of what I was talking about, that idea of faith and tragedy that Trump embodies is he's throwing things out there so that the two sides go after each other.
mhm,
And from a point of view, Trump is he's a reality TV show personality. And if you're going to make a good TV show, that's kind of how you do it. You create that drama by throwing in these things, and then everyone that creates, like, I remember Alfred Hitchcock. He used to do these scenes where he would tell one person to do one thing and another thing, but he wouldn't tell them what he told them. So then
mm.
they would do the scene and they would be in conflict with each other, and it would create an interesting scene. But in real life, that is destructive. Like, it can
Yeah.
make a good story, but in real life, it has real life consequences, and it's very destructive. And so that would be the most generous way to kind of explain Trump is that he's just trying to make a great show. Um, but
Mhm.
it's people are dying, people are being harmed, people are, the mental health layer. I mean, it's just, and then the threat to our country. So
Yeah, and
that's a difference. Yeah.
he's getting people to focus on the meat too, right? As
Hmm.
opposed to the long term. So
Yeah.
one potential way that plays out is a good friend of mine said that what Trump has done to the Republican Party is going to take decades to recover
Hmm.
from.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's taken
so
8 years to get here, and it'd probably take 8+ to get back, if that's even possible, which it may not be.
yeah. And so imagine what that's going to do to the political system.
Yeah.
It's it's going to create a long-term power vacuum by this lack of repentance, a lack of being able to address reality. And
Hmm.
speaking to that, I wanted to speak to two specific examples that are huge red flags. When former President Trump went to the National Association of Black Journalists, the reason why it was actually delayed was because he would did not want to have the fact checking done. And this was reported on numerous outlets. And of course, what did we see last night? His running mate doing the exact same thing. He said, "You promised us," or something
Yeah.
along the lines of,
Yeah. He
you
said,
weren't going to fact check."
yeah, he was being fact checked because he said a lie. And then he said the agreement was that you weren't going to fact check us. And I understand, if you had an agreement, you want to follow that. the problem is the underlying issue, right? There's those who pursue truth want to know when they've gone astray. So I want to be fact checked, because if I'm off, I want you to tell me that.
Yeah.
But those who pursue deception want to find ways to escape accountability. They don't want to be accountable. And so if I'm going to deceive and I'm going to actively do it, the best thing for me is to get rid of the fact checking, because then I have free reign to lie.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a really it's a very corrosive dynamic. And I understand there are legitimate concerns about like fairness, but the problem isn't that people want fact checking that's fair. The fact is they want, what it is they don't want any fact checking. So if they wanted fact checking that was more fair, they could argue for that. But what they're arguing for is no fact checking. So I don't know.
And they
What do you
want
think?
it specifically for them as an entitlement piece. Um,
Yeah.
versus Tim, although he may have had a little bit of, diversion, he was totally open about all the facts. Um, uh, so yeah, there was one situation where, yeah, he ultimately said he misspoke on the Tiananmen Square statement, but the
Yeah,
rest
he
of it,
made some mess ups.
yeah,
Some were pretty bad, but in terms of like he just misspoke, but and he wasn't prepared in some ways. Yeah, I
yeah.
can understand that. Yeah.
In some ways, though, I kind of respect that he ultimately, you know, presented
Yeah.
his face instead of saying, "You promised you weren't going to fact check me."
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Better to make a honest mistake than it is to try and coerce the moderators.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So yeah, that alone, by the way, that is terrifying, right? And I don't know how people are still saying, like I have a status I saw on Facebook yesterday where numerous people were saying JD Vance won. And I was like, you are still rallying around essentially a bold-faced, right in front of your face liar.
well, I think somebody could say that JD Vance won and they still don't support him. That would be different than that he won and that they're supporting him. I think that would be the distinction I would want to make is, okay, they say, what is it? How did his performance affect whether they're going to vote one way or the other? I think would be the question I would ask there. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it from an emotional perspective, maybe that he won, but
Yeah.
I guess I'm skewed in my perspective, but from an
Yeah. I mean, I
objective,
saw two focus group results. One of the focus groups says Waltz won,
mm,
and another one said Vance won, and they were undecided voters.
okay,
So, you know, you could kind of say it might be a wash, half and half of people thought one way or the other. So,
okay. Yeah, just goes to show you there's all sorts of things at play, probably for hundreds of years to lead up to a person's perspective. It's not
yeah,
about that one singular moment.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Um, okay. So that was pretty much Trump. What about Kamala on this side?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I thought, which we talked a little bit about, to kind of reiterate, one of the things that kind of inspired her public service was the story of the Good Samaritan. Particularly teachings in the Bible about looking out for our neighbors, understanding our neighbors aren't just those that live in our area, but also the stranger. And so she's always tried to be an advocate for the voiceless and the vulnerable. And so I just think about just kind of the flip side of Trump in terms of Trump is exploiting the powerless. The most powerless group in our society are those that have the least amount of power, the least amount of rights, and immigrants would probably be in that category. The poor in different areas might be as well. But if you're an immigrant and you're not a citizen, then you're probably the most exploitable. You're probably the most powerless in a lot of ways. If you're a legal immigrant, you might, you know, feel like you're just new to so you might feel like you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. So the fact that she's advocating, children would probably be another group of lower on the power scale. But the fact that she is advocating for all Americans and particularly wanting to advocate for those victims and the powerless, I think that is a godly thing, and I'm grateful that she's that way, and I wish Trump was that way as well. Um, so that's one thing that comes to mind. What about you?
Well, I tried to Google what is an example of when Kamala apologized, because that's a sign of righteousness and humility.
Mm,
Um, it looks like during an event, a voter called Trump, let's just use a politically correct word, mentally incapacitated.
yeah.
I think you know where that word is going. And Kamala laughed at that. And later she did apologize. She said, I didn't hear the words the man used in the moment, but if I had would have stopped and corrected him, uh, or if I had, I would have stopped and corrected him. So I'm
Mm,
sorry. That word and others like it aren't acceptable ever.
yeah.
To draw it into the immigration piece. So here, this is where what I mentioned before, 90% of Christians don't read the Bible. Um, this is where it's a problem, because Republicans stating like immigrants are the worst, like a dictator, typical
Yeah.
playbook would be.
Yeah.
There's
They're a
numerous,
scapegoat for their,
yeah,
it's like a hatred in some
yeah,
cases, or maybe just a dislike in others, you know.
there's numerous verses about how you should be having a entire plan around immigrants.
Hmm.
So here's just a couple verses. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. Then all the people shall say amen. Amen. Deuteronomy 27:19. Genesis 23:4. I am a stranger and an alien residing among you. Give me property among you for a burying place so that I might bury my dead out of sight. So I think
Yeah.
if a Republican heard that without context, they'd be like, that must be a
Yeah.
Democrat speaking.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say it, because even what we're talking about, the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, I've just read a lot of pastors where they preach on it, and Republican members, real hardcore Trump loyalists, they'll say, "Where'd you get that liberal talking point or that woke idea?" And it's literally like Jesus's words, that they're calling woke.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's there's so much in the Bible about an immigrant and taking care of them, and part of it's driven like, hey, you Israelites, the Jewish people, you were the foreigner in Egypt.
Yeah.
Like, don't ever forget, you're to treat the immigrant well, because it's also a reminder that you were them. And that's, I think, just an important thing that
Yeah. And we have
don't.
inherited that story, so we need to live up to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So um there's Genesis 1:27, we're all made in the image of God, right? That's this idea that um now I think a lot of good faith Republicans would say, well, border we want control over the border to make sure that we're not letting bad stuff in.
Hmm.
And I think that's a legitimate thing, and Kamala Harris has agreed to sign the bipartisan bill that they'd come up with, that Trump had that he essentially said he wasn't going to pass it because he wanted the issue so he could try and win the presidency. So instead
Yeah.
of trying to solve the problem, he perpetuated it. And
That's
the
another one
yeah.
I'm so confused by, bro. Like, you still follow a man that is actively manipulating the system against you.
Yeah, and it's wild because when Trump was president, his first or second year, there was again another border bill that was going to be passed. Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House, and he had Trump's agreement, and then Trump backed off because this, I guess it was in 2022, because the midterms were coming, and Trump wanted the issue for the midterms. So he didn't want us to pass the bill. So when he was president, he did it. And then this year, when he was not president, he did it again. So it's kind of like Lucy with the football. I'm gonna, he's got this, I'll build a wall, I'll pass a border bill, and he doesn't do anything. He just keeps the issue alive. And the part of it is because it's such a salient issue. And I think a way to test it, because I think people that are good faith about it and have a good thing, I mean, that's just understanding that situation is one way to test it. The other is take the Springfield, Ohio example. The Haitians are legal immigrants. They're not
Yeah.
illegals.
Yeah.
And yet the hatred and attacks against them. So is it about legality or is it something else? And I think for some people there is a hatred. Some people, it might be like an implicit one versus an explicit one. And some people might have a good faith argument. But when you're looking at a situation like that, it's being exploited. It's pretty obvious if you want to see it.
Yeah.
I mean, JD Vance even came out and admitted that he was lying about the whole thing. But that he was okay telling a lie because it brought attention to the issue, which is a Machiavellian idea, which is the means justify the ends. Or sorry, the ends justify the means. So it doesn't matter what I do or how I do it. Truth doesn't matter as long as we get the outcome we want, which is the opposite of Christianity. That's the opposite of righteousness. That's a thirst and hunger for unrighteousness, is that type of approach. So,
Yeah. You know, there was a book you read, I think, a few years ago, which is, I think, the majority of civil wars start from this spouting of these ethnic groups or these minorities or majorities. There's threats of power being lost, basically. And so
yep.
Trump and Vance are essentially playing with that. They're playing with something that could cause another, probably millions of people to die,
Yeah.
just as a means to an end, like you said,
Yeah.
which is disgusting.
Yeah.
It's nowhere anywhere close to righteousness on that.
Yeah. So
And I
as far
wanted
as,
to,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I just wanted to put a button on the immigration thing. To
Yeah.
be clear, we're not saying we're totally liberal about it either. We could create a plan, a systematic,
Yeah. A
bipartisan plan.
bipartisan plan, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah, that was already created. um, that could work this out. It's not saying let's all we'll just welcome everybody, as many people as possible all the time. And I'm pretty sure the Bible also is not for that either. The Bible is all about structure and hierarchy and systems. So go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, yeah, just understanding like at the core of it, Christ came to save us. We didn't want it. We rejected him. We murdered him. Yet he then resurrected, and that resurrection is how we can be transformed. And I think we're to love other people the way that Jesus loved us. And we have to think of ourselves as someone who nailed Jesus to the cross and think about those powerless people and the neighbor and the rival and the enemy. And we're to love them the way Jesus loved us. And who better embodies that, right? Is it Trump? Does Trump embody loving your enemies? Or does Harris? Like, who does a better job? And Trump actually, not only does he pour gasoline on the hatred of Democrats as a Republican enemy, but he chastises those that are not loyal. So someone like myself who is a Republican, lifelong Republican, because I don't have loyalty to Trump, him and all of his acolyte leaders, they repeatedly say, we don't want you. You are unwanted. You are not one of us. You can't be a Republican. And that what they mean is I can't be a Republican because I don't support Trump, carte blanche. And the contrast to that is Kamala Harris, which is she's a Democrat who is reaching out to Republicans. She has had so many Republican endorsements. It's just unheard of. There would be no such thing as Republicans for Harris if there was a normal Republican candidate that wasn't Trump. Just wouldn't exist. And so that group has been alienated by Republicans because of Trump. But Harris and her campaign have reached out and they've done events where they listen to Republicans, they hear what they say, and she has really come to the middle and moderated on a lot of positions and really met. I did not expect this, nor did I ask for it, but she has come my direction from a policy and value standpoint way more than I ever expected. And I'm very grateful for that and appreciate it. And I think that's just an example of her embodying that reaching out. Now you could be cynical about it and say, well, she's only doing that to win. I would say, well, maybe. And I would say I'd at least, I mean, I would love if Trump did that. I mean, instead of alienating people that aren't loyal to him, he could at least pretend to like them instead of insulting us. So even if it's a facade is sometimes, you don't want a fake mask. But my point is that like if you're going to reach out and to the other side, it just because someone doesn't mean it's problematic, you know. It could be a good thing. So that's a few
Mhm.
thoughts to keep in mind. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, anything you would add to that or say about that?
I would say also to speak to that loyalty part, the Project 2025, of course, he denies being connected to it, but there's many connection points to him about it and JD Vets. But one of the first things is to eliminate people that are not fiercely loyal to him
Yeah.
and Republican, which is just a big red flag for me too.
Yeah,
Um,
it's that same thing that goes back to the fact checking. It's the desire for no accountability so that we can do whatever we want
yeah.
without impunity, or without, consequence. And so, yeah, I think, with that said, I think there's a lot I don't know about Harris in terms of how this might apply to her. I I I, I had a few examples, and but I don't know a lot about her personal faith walk, and I know some details, but it's just limited, I guess, is my understanding. And there might be more out there they just haven't explored, but that would be an area where I think it'd be nice to see more of that from her, and for her to be more forthcoming about how it how it plays a role in her life, um
Mhm.
outside of the little things that I found. So
Yep, looks like she had a combination of Hinduism and Christianity growing up. Uh,
okay.
her father was Christian, her mother was Hindu, and she grew up attending service at a Black Baptist church. Um, there was something I was about to mention, but it may have just left my head.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
mean, I guess the one thing I would also add is just like her willing to change, from where she was 2020. Um, you know, the willingness to change, I think, is at least a sign, someone's willing to change. Um, why they change, I think, is an important question, and should
hmm,
ask that and answer it. But it is a signal that, okay, this person is at least willing to change for a greater purpose, for a greater vision, particularly as a state where the stakes are what they are. So,
yeah. He also, oh, I just remembered. She also mentioned that the uh, cabinet will have at least one Republican member in
yeah.
it.
So that's an example of trying to bring two groups together
Yeah.
that are at odds. It's reaching out to them. It's trying to make right relationship, right?
Hmm.
And some people are just going to never want unity. They're going to want division. And perhaps it's because they benefit from it. Maybe they're exploiting the situation. Or maybe it's because they have contempt. I have my own history of contempt, and realizing, oh yeah, I've got to work through that. Um, and I think a lot of that contempt was there before even Trump came along, and Trump just exploited it, the unresolved contempt and unresolved grief.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. This was quite well orchestrated by the enemy because we have been taught to never go to therapy, never to face our traumas, to go deep into what defines us. And what is the best type of man to take advantage of that? Trump.
yeah, someone who's going to exploit that,
Yeah.
and really attract all the people that are like that into leadership roles to then, be loyal to him. When you have a criminal as a leader, you're going to have other criminals coming out of the woodwork, and it just makes it more and more difficult to deal with the situation, because yeah, and you have people that are saying we shouldn't have fact checking. They don't, essentially what they're saying is, we don't want accountability. Um, we want to do whatever we want. We don't want anyone telling us what to do. And there's going to be consequences. And America's got to decide, we're in hard mode. If we elect Trump, we're going to move into nightmare mode, because these ideas and issues will be validated. Essentially say it's okay to be a criminal as a leader of the country, it's okay to do these horrible things, to say these horrible things, to spread these horrible lies. Because now we know, like in 2016, perhaps a lot of people didn't realize who Trump was or what he was capable of, but we had 4 years of it, and we've had 4 years after it. So we know his deception, his contempt for truth. We know his faith in tragedy. And now if we choose him, it's our own, we're inviting our own judgment. We're inviting judgment upon ourselves. So, but I believe America is going to make the right choice in this situation, and not choose deception and brokenness, and we'll turn the page and move forward to a better future.
Yeah. As we start to wrap up, I want to say one of our close friends that decided to leave our group because of this sort of matter, actually two of our friends, uh, they mentioned, well, one of them mentioned that, oh, this is just par for the course. These folks just talk like this to each other because that's just how they behave. And it made me think like, no, when George Bush was in office or Barack or Clinton, this was not as dire back in those days and those other campaigns. I didn't wake up, for example, when Trump was president and, at 2 a.m. in the morning, he was eating some burgers and making some obnoxious tweets. Uh, that just didn't happen. It's not the same thing. It's not par for the course. To say that is
Well,
kind of
yeah. Well,
crazy.
I would say there was, at a small level, there was some of that. But I actually think that dismissal is part of the problem. We dismissed it when it was small. It may be not as prevalent. There wasn't Twitter. A little bit. Talk radio would do that kind of thing. And then it just grew into a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. Now it's like the giant dragon that's like breathing fire on us.
Hmm.
And so I think that's actually part of the problem, is that we're dismissing sin. We're saying this sin was okay. It
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
a big deal. But now it's bigger. It's still okay. That's just how it is. And it's like, you know what? There can be an acknowledgement of, like, there is going to always be a level of an issue, but it doesn't make it okay. Like, you can acknowledge it and say that it's wrong, and you can acknowledge it. But it kind of goes back to like the partisanship of, if you vote for a criminal, um, like, you're actually part of the problem now. So this is where I think that idea of dismissing it actually turns to voting, which means we vote for those people. So we're essentially rewarding them. Hey, you did that. You said that terrible thing. You did that terrible thing. We're going to vote you back in office. We're going to reward you for what you did. And then the next person does it, and they do it a little bit worse. And then the next person does it. And then you get Trump in that just like goes all, he's like, I'm going to have free reign. They'll let me do whatever I want. I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they'll still support me. And that's what I think Trump figured out, is the systemic problem that he could exploit was, they'll just, because I have an R next to my name, they'll do whatever I ask them to do. They'll say whatever I want them to say. And sometimes they'll push back if I go too far, but I'll just go as far as I can, push the envelope, and then if I need to come back a little bit, I will. And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's I think the habit of demonizing our enemies, political enemies or political rivals, and dismissing sin is part of what opened the door for the situation we're in.
Indeed. But to speak to that last point, he literally said, Trump, recently in a Fox News interview that, hey, you don't like me, but you have to vote for me.
Yeah. I think he even said something to the Christians in one event where it's like, um, it was something along those lines, like, I just need your vote and then I'm done with you. Or it was something
Oh, yeah, yeah. That was a few
like,
months ago.
yeah. Trump is transactional. You do for me, I do for you. I don't care about values. I don't care about vision. You could be the worst person in the world, but if you do something for me, I'll do something for you. And so it's just a separate thing. And so, yeah, he says those kind of transactional things all the time. And there's nothing beyond transaction for him. That's what it's about. It's the transaction. And that's why loyalty is so important to him, is because be loyal to me, be loyal to you. You're not loyal to me, you'll become my enemy. And I will seek retribution to make your life as horrible and miserable as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to address the earlier point you made way, way back towards the beginning, people that say, oh, we have these three branches of government. He can't get past that. He'll be fine. Well, actually, something that I learned a few years ago when I was playing trivia with some friends is that the cabinet actually has pretty strong control and over the government. And so if he's putting family members in these cabinet positions or random people off the street that just are loyal to him, as opposed to competent, educated people that have spent their entire life doing this and know what they're doing, then these other people could do whatever.
Yeah.
And the president can make an executive order, and these cabinet members will go enforce it through the executive branch.
Yeah.
So that I just learned about it a few years ago. You may not be aware of it. Just wanted to drop that. He could cause some serious damage, literally within a
Yeah,
matter
I
of
think,
hours.
well, it's important to recognize that the president has to submit to the system. And so if the Supreme Court could come up with a ruling that tells the president no, but it's self-enforcing. Trump could defy the Supreme Court and just say, well, I'm just going to ignore them. And then the question is, who is going to enforce that? Because we don't have an enforcement mechanism, the president can just defy Supreme Court rulings, even if they were against him, or he can defy anything. And I think that's what people fail to realize is like, if Trump gets reelected, he's facing all these criminal trials, so he's likely to go to prison at some point, and that means um after his term. So if I'm him, I'm a president, and if I leave office, I'm going to prison. I'm going to do whatever I can to stay in office, right? And so people assume, like in 2028, he's just going to willingly leave. Well, why? He didn't willingly leave in 2020. Why would he willingly leave in 2028? And if he chooses to do that, who's going to stop him? Because there is no enforcer. There's no, and if the security forces that might escort him off the White House, if they're all his guys and they're going to
Yeah,
be loyal to him, who's going to escort him out of the White House? Nobody. And
yeah,
who's going to actually want to try and enforce that? Like, is the military actually going to try and go in the White House and evict him? Like, it just becomes a nightmare. Are the people going to protest until he leaves? That is called nightmare mode. And so um there is no assumption that, like, one of the things about America's history is we have a history and tradition of peaceful transfers of power from one president to the next. And that's the great thing about democracy is it's a way to change leadership when we don't like it without violence and suffering and tragedy. And Trump disrupted that in 2020. And he's likely to do it again. And I think that risk is too great to allow him to be president again. And some people might say, well, the system will hold. And the question to them is, what exactly will stop him? Like, give me the mechanics, the person, what is the specific thing that's going to change that? And so that's, I think a lot of people they don't understand how the system works, and they don't understand the risk. And it doesn't mean it's a guaranteed outcome, but it's certainly a high enough risk that it's not worth taking.
Hmm. You know, I think another part that makes this just such an exacerbating issue is that at some point when I have these conversations with people, there's a the Trump supporter inevitably gets agitated, sometimes
Mhm.
gets their
Mhm.
voice loud.
Yeah, the name calling is a big one.
Yeah, and I never experienced
Disparaging.
that before in past campaigns either, and that just also just not good at
Yeah.
all.
Well, I think when we feel powerless and we feel like we're stuck or trapped in an argument, let's say, I just have a sense of like, oh, I feel like there's nothing I can do or say to change this. And so I think out of that comes like name calling and other things, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a
The
emotional
worst,
reaction. Yeah.
yeah, the worst of that is, of course, violence.
Yeah. That would be the escalation of it. Yeah.
Mhm. And
So,
so Trump specifically knows how to press those buttons in people.
mhm.
because they have no outlet, right? The enemy has pulled the outlets away. If you're looking into your own outlets,
Yeah.
into your pain, that your buttons to be pushed, then
Hmm.
you're a little girl, right? Like we've talked about
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So it's on all of us to pursue righteousness, is to look into those three-prong outlets in every different
Yeah.
fashion.
Yeah. Because
Uh,
this will expose in all of us.
yeah.
We're at different points in the journey, but this will expose for all of us that there is parts of us that needs God to work out that righteousness in us, because there are parts of us that are unrighteous. And this will surface those things, these types of tension points. And my encouragement to people is to lean into the tension. Don't try to get rid of the tension or run away from it or avoid it. Lean into the tension and let God use the tension to transform you towards righteousness and towards right living with Him and the community of God, and with our friends, community, rivals, and enemies. And that's our opportunity
How do we generate the courage to look into that?
to lean into the tension.
Yeah.
I think part of it comes from a recognition. Like if we're afraid of leaning into the tension, we have to come to a point where we're actually more afraid of not leaning into the tension, because when we let something go on and on and on, it turns into something bigger, and then it can blow up and have consequences. And so just thinking to myself, because I've done that many times, I have to be more afraid of letting it grow into something that blows up than the tension before me. And so I have to let go of being called names or being yelled at or being ostracized or alienated. I have to give up a lot of those things that give me comfort and peace. And that's the opportunity for God, for me to go, well, is God giving me those things? And God, you give me the peace, you give me the comfort. I can sort of not worry about what man thinks of me, because what I care most about is what God thinks of me. And before God, I am righteous. So if man says I'm a horrible, terrible jerk face, I can listen to that and go, maybe they're right. Or I can go, actually, they're the jerk face and they're just projecting on me. I have freedom to pursue the truth, because the truth doesn't change my identity in Christ. So those are a couple things that come to mind. I think a lot of it comes down to experiences where where we don't, eventually we avoid the tension, we avoid the tension, we avoid the tension, and then it blows up. And we go, okay, next time I'm just gonna lean into it, because I don't necessarily want to lean into it, but it's better than the alternative.
Yeah. It's better be proactive, right?
Yeah.
There was some quote by Jordan Peterson. I think he said, if you have some unhealthy habits, perhaps acting out, perhaps yelling, yelling, um, there's going to be a consequence, and there's no way to
Yeah.
escape that. The only
Yeah.
thing you can do is try to get ahead of it, like you're saying.
Yeah. Absorb, sort of embrace the consequence, absorb it, make it right, and move forward.
Yeah.
So
I think at some point, well, I'll go into a personal kind of more daily or maybe weekly routine. I worship God. That helps me to hear from Him and hear what pleases Him. And I may or may not act on it, just to be frank with it. But it brings me courage to move forward, even if it is 1 millimeter. And so I would
yeah.
advise that if you're having trouble having the courage to break out of something that has brought you comfort for so long,
Yeah.
be it a political party,
Hmm.
another habit, even news or TV. At some point, that could become unhealthy too, right? Now you're not having meaningful conversations with your spouse or something like that. Um, so wanted to mention those things. At some point, however, in addition to what I completely agree with what you said, the downward spiral and the bottom of that is terrifying. But I would also say at some point in your Christian journey, you'll also realize, oh wait, this is hurting people. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Or this is even more hurting God.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
when you get into a deep relationship and you have that reverence of breaking his heart, then
Yeah.
now you're at a different
Hmm.
level too.
Oh yeah, yeah,
That brings up, it connects, I guess, to righteousness also because you're in right relationship with God, and
yeah,
anything that breaks his heart, you want to try to at least mitigate as much as you can.
exactly. Yep.
All right. Well, we said we were going to try to do half an hour. So much for that. This was awesome. We always get a lot of gold out of these sessions, brother. I
Yeah,
really appreciate your time. In closing, have the courage to continue your hunger for righteousness through Christ, through God the Father, who sent Christ, and of course, the Holy Spirit, who consistently speaks to you if you want to hear from him.
yeah,
Uh, Jason, any last words, brother?
yeah. I mean, I think that we're all going to spiral downward in our brokenness and sin, and at some point we gotta go. You know what? My way's not working, God. Show me yours. Let that go, and let God transform us and move us towards that righteousness with Him and with others. And that's the opportunity we have, and I encourage everyone to embrace that, particularly in the parts of their life that they may be like, God, you can help me be righteous over here and over here, but not here. You know, consider opening that door just a little bit to the thing that you're scared of Him looking into, and in politics is really in a lot of ways a projection, um, or an exaggeration or a reflection of ourselves. And so if we sort of dismiss a sin in a political leader, perhaps that's a sin we're dismissing in ourselves or someone around us. And to dismiss it in politics would be to hold ourselves and that person accountable. And that's a hard thing to do. But take a step towards it.
Yeah. That makes me think of maybe there's some people that are not quite ready to accept God. And so I want to challenge you there. My brother Jason just mentioned how, we could be in the downward spiral and hurt people along the way. And I recently saw an interview on YouTube about it was a kind of debate between Christianity and an atheist, and these were doctors, scholars, and the atheist was challenged with what determines your value system? Is it just a matter of like you're born and you know you're not supposed to stab somebody? And the atheist couldn't really answer that without saying, well, at some point somebody will make a law and that makes it
Yeah.
wrong. Well, I want to challenge you to explore Christianity because God's ways, although hard to understand, hard to even progressively live out, are better ways. We've seen the innumerable results of that throughout history, how his hand is constantly in the world helping. Even Red Cross is one of the biggest nonprofits in the world, started by a Christian. So he's not an absent father, absent brother, absent counselor.
Yeah.
So explore that and see how that could provide return for your life.
Yeah. That's
Anything to
good.
add, Jason?
I mean, I guess the last thing I would add to that is we think about who think about who you're supporting and what your Christian reasons are. What are your Christ-centered reasons for supporting that person? And let that drive it. And if you don't have an answer, come up with something. And I think that's partially what we're trying to do with this project with the Beatitudes and the presidential candidates is giving people those insights.
Mhm.
Um, but ask yourself, is my choice based on Christian reasons? Is Christ's example, his teachings, or is it based on my fear? Is it based on like going after my enemies or protecting me from my enemies? Like when you get to those reasons, if they're not, like, ask yourself, like, as a Christian, is it a good thing for me to vote for someone because I hate someone else or I don't like them or I think they're going to hurt me? Okay. So let like kind of work through that. or I'm going to vote for someone that has a policy that bothers me, or that treats people in a way that bothers me. Like, it's complicated. There's not going to ever be a candidate that sort of generally we agree with or can sort of support anything they say or do. But really just kind of dive into the deeper reasoning behind what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then just go take ask God through prayer, but also through study, like, how is this informed by my Christianity and Jesus, and see if there's something that you need to work on.
Hmm. And courageously, something you may have to die to.
Yeah,
And as weird as it sounds, dying to yourself for God's purpose is a pleasant aroma to God.
yeah,
It's
it's
like it was.
terrifying,
Yeah.
but if you have that faith, you can take that step out onto that invisible bridge to the other side.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, as Christians, what we're called to do, and not stay on the sideline and terrified. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for watching another episode. This has been Beatitude number 4. And it was, let me see if I could repeat it for you just to wrap up here. I want to make sure I get it right. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. We'll see y'all in the next episode. Thanks for watching another episode of From Pain to Gain. Catch you in the next one.
Adios.